Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to a trade venture. I can't even say another one because it's been a while since I actually made one of these. Alright, today I am going to be talking about why you might hate Iris West Allen from the CW Flash series. I've recently been noticing that there's a resurgence in the Flash. Last year, April 25th, 2024, it was essentially pseudo Flash Day. Earlier in the inception of the Flash show, originally Barry was supposed to disappear from the face of the earth on April 25th, 2024. It was a predestined thing that the show kind of retconned into being something else as it went along. And then eventually Barry beat it, and he was going to end up being fine, blah, 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 blah. But essentially, one of the major points was that that was such an integral part of what was going to happen to his character that a lot of fans really invested themselves into the dateline of when the Flash was originally going to disappear. And so essentially when we got to that point in real life, there was a resurgence of Flash material, and I'm starting to notice that there's a lot of people who either watched the Flash for the first time or reiterating points that they had seen previously while it was airing. And now we're back to a lot of people essentially complaining about the character of Iris West Allen, who I'm gonna say isn't my favorite character in the show, but as an independent film writer and somebody who watched The Flash from beginning to end, all the way from 2014 to 2023, crazy amount of time for a show to last, by the way. I'm going to give my take on why the character of Iris West Allen didn't really work for the show the way they intended, because I feel like it's due to the fact that they made intentional decisions that ended up hurting her character specifically. I don't even think that it's the fault of the character or the way that they wrote her, like in general. I feel like it's more the direction that they tried to go for the show, but it didn't necessarily hold water when it came to her character. That's the way that I'm going to interpret it. So, yeah, come along with me. I'm going to take you on a trade venture and explain why I think you might hate Iris West Allen. And to get it out of the way, there's a lot of hate that Iris got that transferred into aspects of Candace Patton's like career. It I definitely remember that there were a lot of people who came at her sideways for the character that she was portraying. Some who came at the decision to change the comic depiction of Iris West from a white woman to a black woman, blah, 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 blah. Some who think that her romance just ultimately halted the show. All of which are things that, like, if those are the reasons why you hate Iris, because she's a woman, because she's black, because you don't like romance, I don't know. You just might not like CW shows. It has nothing to do with the character, and it definitely doesn't have anything to do with Candace, because regardless of whether or not I like the character of Iris, I definitely can say that she went out there and was putting the work in to try and do her best for that character. Um, maybe maybe she had personal things with the character and other aspects of the show that she personally didn't like. I can't speak to that because I'm not her there, but I can't say anything other than what I saw and what I got, and she was there from beginning to end for a reason, I think. So I'm just going to ignore aspects of that. I'm going to tell you why narratively and from like a breakdown of show construction, why her character specifically ended up getting such a bad rap as we went on. So, one major aspect of The Flash that was started off actually in Arrow was Barry's intelligence. No matter how goofy you think Barry was as a character, they always depicted him as intelligent. Even before the Flash actually started, we got to see his intelligence in Arrow when he was first introduced. when he essentially broke down a crime scene that Oliver hadn't figured out, that Detective Lance, can't remember if he was more than a detective at that point or not, but that Detective Lance hadn't figured out, that Felicity, who was probably the smartest person in the Arrowverse that had been introduced to us at the time, um, hadn't really pieced together. But Barry, with his ingenuity and his way of thinking, essentially got to break down the steps of how a seemingly impossible crime got to happen. The only person in the room who could quite literally understand what Barry was talking about was Felicity Smoke, who I've aforementioned was probably the smartest character that we got to see in the Arrowverse at that time. I get that people probably, feel a way about her character as the show went on, but you cannot deny the fact that by Arrow season 2, it was like Felicity Smoke, Ray Palmer, and Barry Allen. Those three were the characters that were introduced to us with high level IQ. So initially in the Flash, they did this thing where they gave him essentially like analytic capabilities similar to the Mentalist or Sean from Spike or Robert Downey Jr.'s version of what's his name, Sherlock Holmes. So that to us was a more direct depiction of how his intelligence worked that we hadn't got to see in Arrow because it wasn't from his perspective. And this was an aspect that shifted heavily, I think, even in season 1. It's only in like the first initial episodes that I can remember. I know that they have like a long scene in the pilot that I, for whatever reason, can't find. But here's a scene from uh, season 1, episode 2, where he does something similar, but this is like a more tamed version of it. Can't even remember how bad Barry was at lying. Okay, so here we are back with Barry. Essentially, everybody in the room sees things one way. And now here we are with Barry, who sees things a totally different way. And then the breakdown, the analytic mindset. Um, it's a it's a lot more tame in this second episode. I remember in the first episode they had like the math flying in the background of his mind and everything. It was crazy how much work they went to do to try and make his character seem so hyper intelligent. Um, but one of the major aspects that they decided to do with the Flash was focus on the idea of Team Flash. They wanted to give Barry, I guess, obstacles that he had to face so that he wouldn't be able to just fix things by himself. Giving a character super speed and then making them hyper intelligent, it's a recipe for a very short lived series because either he should be thinking his way out of problems or he should be super speeding his way out of problems. Um, it's very hard to condition a growing character, give him a level of power where he can travel through time and make duplicates of himself and all this other stuff, and also have him be smart enough to use those powers to their full range. So the CW kind of mitigated that by saying that the other members of Team Flash were people that Barry would have to rely on in order to be an effective superhero and in order to make him the most experienced Flash that he can be. And for the most part, I kind of understand it creates an obstacle because Barry's no longer reliant on figuring everything out. He needs the team to figure stuff out, which is a hit or miss decision. It missed for me. I personally didn't like this, but honestly, one of the major things that sort of makes it work is that every member of Team Flash is essentially an expert in their field. They have some type of critical experience, skill, or mindset that helps them to be effective enough to match the villains that the Flash would face. And so they Barry wouldn't have to rely on his own wit and ingenuity to figure stuff out. He could rely on the other members of Team Flash to help him out. The only character that I personally think doesn't have that is Iris, who interjects herself into the team. It doesn't feel as natural a decision as everybody else, in my opinion, because she lacks that personal experience. Um, the end result of Iris's character is that she becomes an investigative journalist, and had that been her initial job or occupation in the Arrowverse, maybe that could have worked. But Iris went from being a barista to being like an independent vlogger to then becoming a journalist who wasn't taken seriously, and then a uh, running her own news station in the city or something like that. Um, Something along those lines. She essentially takes over and has like a whole team of people that work for her directly. Um, I get the feeling of wanting to give Iris progression, but she should have been someone who was adjacent to the Flash and Team Flash rather than being directly in there because like I said, she does not offer anything to the team that they didn't already have. They don't need the investigative side because they already had Joe West, her father, who had been an experienced detective for her whole life and Barry's whole life. So there was no reason to really need her for that. Um, Same reason that they don't really need her for the more personable aspects. I guess if they wanted to use her for like community outreach, that might have worked. But I don't directly remember her connecting Barry to like the citizens of the city or anything in a direct way. I just remember her doing investigative journalism, and then she would go out of her way to talk people off ledges or try to be the hero in situations and stuff. Which I mean I'll give you this. She got street cred, but it's just that because she's in competition with all these other experts in their field and in competition for Barry's spotlight, it just feels really harsh when you have her character show up and it's like they really don't need her. That's the major reason why people don't like Iris in the Flash. Any of those instances where she feels integrated start to feel forced because of that major decision they made for Barry's character to need to rely on people. Because, unlike the rest of the main characters that are in Team Flash, they didn't establish what she was supposed to be relied on for before she got on the team. Um, you know why everybody else is there before they get there. They wanted to grow Iris alongside Barry to give her more character development, and it feels like they should have been two people growing side by side rather than two people that were integratedly growing. They just couldn't make a good decision for Barry's character that didn't end up hurting Iris's, in my opinion, in terms of narrative. But that's the first major thing, and now we're just gonna get into the other things that I feel like ultimately reinforced the negative aspects of where you would take that character. So in season 3 of Arrow, we get introduced to Savitar, the big bad of the season, and the major aspect of the season was that Savitar was destined to kill Iris West. And so this was a really, as it says on the thing, this was a really pivotal plot point because essentially it gave Iris a timetable. And where I think the writers messed up is that they already had a character that people were on the fence about in terms of involvement within the show. There are other reasons why people just didn't personally like Iris going into season 3. So I guess their mindset was making Iris a major plot point would help her character and help people to essentially want to save her, but it inadvertently has another aspect that it does that if I were in the writers room I probably would tell them this is something that we need to be wary of. And that's that setting up a whole season for Iris where we're told that she's supposed to die then hurts the show if she lives because it feels like the narrative was lying to us. Um, and for a show that is all about time travel, literally the first season's villain comes from the future to hurt Barry. Um, with a show that's dealing with a lot of consequences of said time travel because we went into season 3 where Barry had created Flashpoint, which was an alternate timeline where he stopped his mom from being killed and so his parents got to live, but it ended up causing issues that went on even after he reverted the world because it didn't revert the same. Um, all these things essentially causes a lot of problems because then it's just like how much do you take them seriously in terms of the narrative if Barry can still find ways to circumnavigate the most negative aspects of those consequences. And so when you get to a character like Iris and a lot of people aren't jiving with her character, and on top of that, you set up a major stake that she's going to die, which would essentially create one of the most major consequences in the show. Tell us for a whole season that, well, at least half a season when Savitar becomes like a major part, I guess. Um, but tell us for a whole season that she's destined to die here, and then she doesn't. It's 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 a mind-boggling. I don't see how they didn't have the foresight to see where that was going to lead to with people not being as invested with her character because it feels like we were gaslit for a whole season. Bad decision. Now, did I want Iris to die in season 3? No. And it feels disingenuous to try and say that you believe that Iris was actually going to die. Like, that would have been a really weird thing for them to decide to do. But when a story like time travel, it would have been a more interesting twist if she did die, and then subsequent seasons were formulated around whether or not like she could be saved or some timey wimey stuff to where it could be adjusted and blah 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 blah, or if at the very bare minimum, uh, Iris does die at the hands of Savitar, and then Barry in his grief. Like I know that they had done that as the the ending twist for season 2, but it would have been interesting if they could have revisited the idea of Flashpoint um, to try and get something to happen there. So essentially, the issues that Barry caused at the beginning of season 2 then became his motivation to try and fix things a different way at the end of season 3. It almost felt like those things should have been bookended in some way, shape, or form. But I don't know because then you get into whole aspects of like why didn't the legends get involved when Savitar was causing problems and blah 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 blah. Like you start asking questions that just it's gonna make you make your head itch. Anyway, point being, this whole plot line essentially feels like a huge gaslight, and that's another reason why I feel like people fell off of the character of Iris. Going in to season 4. So essentially, the season right after we got gaslit that she was going to die. For whatever reason, they decided to make her the leader of Team Flash. Now, this was the point where I was just like, y'all just throwing Iris storylines into the mix because you just don't know what to do with her character. So Iris at the end of season 3 was sad because Barry essentially had to sacrifice himself in order to keep all of time from falling apart because they had managed to beat Savitar, which shouldn't have happened, blah 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 blah. And then Barry ended up taking his place as like penance for causing so many problems that essentially created Savitar in the first place, I guess, is how you want to look at it. In that time frame before he left, Barry had asked Cisco to lead the team, thinking that he was ready. And then when we got to season 4, Iris was in charge of Team Flash and was essentially um, playmaking. And it was just super confusing as to why they decided to do it. I know why they did it because they didn't have a real reason for Iris to be involved with Barry not in the picture. And so they wanted to try and say that Iris was hyper fixated on living up to the example that Barry set when he sacrificed himself. The reason why it doesn't work is because again, there's no real reason for her to be the leader. Involved, maybe I could see, um, but the leader of Team Flash sounds crazy. It was just a crazy decision for them to make. I genuinely don't know why they get it. I even get for people who might try to defend the decision that in Flashpoint she was quarterbacking for Wally's version of the Flash that existed in Flashpoint, but like we don't know that those characters were even remotely the same enough to make it work in that way. It just felt weird. It's such a forced decision, and especially when you get to season 4 episode 1 and Cisco thinks that he's figured out a way to save Barry that Iris doesn't even want to try because she's just accepted the fact that he's gone. It just feels like she's not an effective leader. But then they double down on it when Barry eventually does come back in season 4. He allows Iris to stay in charge of Team Flash. Brother man, you the Flash. Lead your team. Stupid. That's the other reason why I can't even stay on that point. Is that was such a throwaway decision for them to make. So much so that when we get into the latter half of season 6 into season 7, I believe, because I don't think that they fixed this at the end of 6. I think it gets fixed at the beginning of 7. Um, they have a storyline where Iris gets trapped in a mirror dimension and a mirror copy of her replaces her on regular Earth. And so she's acting as a spy for one of the major villains. And Team Flash can't tell the difference between Mirror Iris and Main Iris. And see, the thing with this is that eventually Barry is able to tell that Mirror Iris isn't actually our main line Iris West. And he tries to put her to a test and it fails. But it mostly fails because the rest of Team Flash doesn't see what Barry sees, which goes into a whole thing of like Team Flash gaslighting Barry, which the initial point that I'm making about why people hate Iris specifically is that his reliance on Team Flash really deters from his character, and this shows back up here because a lot of times they just kind of gaslight Barry into believing things are true that aren't. And Iris is the worst case of this because she's so significantly close. I get what they're going for, right? But it's like a thing where Iris is so close to Barry that she essentially breaks him down whenever they have a disagreement on things, but it mostly feels like Barry is forced to cave into Iris's like desires for things rather than them having an amicable decision making where they rise above themselves. And that happens so often that when we get to the end of season 6 into season 7 with a mirror copy of Iris, the team who she leads can't tell the difference between whether or not she's been replaced and whether or not it's actually her, because her actions are practically the same on the surface. Like, Barry points it out because I remember he makes a joke that like Iris made him pancakes. Mirror Iris makes him pancakes, but they're actually good pancakes, and Iris can't cook or something like that. There's something that sets him off before that, but I remember it being a hilarious line that he tried to reinforce this by being like, Iris can't cook. And there are hilarious scenes where like Iris tries to make him pancakes, and she like ruins them so much that she's like, I'm gonna make you banana. And a lot of like other just like obvious things, just like how do you make banana. I don't know. She just takes that random banana and just cuts it up and serves it to him, I guess. But it's issues like that because it makes you feel that the rest of the characters don't really know her or can't tell the difference between a clearly evil copy of her. Um, because I do think that like actions wise, they did a good job of showcasing that they were the same. But Mirror Iris was doing a lot of work behind the scenes that Team Flash should have picked up on going into the situation, and I just don't even. Well, I know why they couldn't decide it because of all the previous gaslighting and stuff. It almost felt like she was just doing things that Iris would have done anyway when they disagreed. The premier gaslight of one of the premier gaslights of the show is when Barry thinks that he's caught Mirror Iris, and he uses a device to like scan her, and if it was a mirror Iris, she would like look different, but she switches the device before Barry gets to use it. So um she essentially switches it with like a mirror dimension of the device. So it looks like she's normal, but when she uses it on Barry, he looks like he's the mirror dimension person, and it's just hilarious to me because Team Flash falls for it for the most part, and I'm like, it really ain't that far removed from something that she might do. Hey, don't forget, Barry. She was gonna keep your tail in the Speed Force. Like, you would not have come back in season 4 if it were up to Iris. So yeah, that was just a major aspect of why people didn't like her. And then the final reason I can say, Barry had a lot of love interests in the show, and each of them spent more time developing the relationship, I think, than Iris and Barry did. Now, do I think that Iris has higher highs in terms of their relationship? Yes. I do think that they got more romantic in the nature of how their dynamic worked as the show went on. The issue is that the love story of Barry and Alice, the love story of Barry and Iris was a predetermined thing. The same newspaper article that said Barry was supposed to disappear in Crisis that we initially saw in the early episodes of The Flash was written by Iris West Allen. So before she was even uh, romantically involved with Barry, it was predetermined that they were supposed to get married. So And then on top of it, she was the love interest that Barry had since he was a child. So it was always a thing where the show was pushing that they were going to get together. And to be honest, I feel like they just ran with those aspects of the show rather than giving them good moments to build their relationship upon. Whereas whenever there was another love interest, they either had something in common, they spent time going on dates that didn't feel like awkward. Because it's still weird that in this version of The Flash, Barry goes to live with Joe and Iris as a child. And so it's just like he's had this fixation on her since they were like 8 years old or something. Which, okay, like kind of weird. That's your stepsister, but whatever. You know, you Candace pretty, I guess. Um, but from characters like Felicity, who he had a romance with, Patty Spivot, Linda Park, who he had a romance with, and did Linda Dusty just to try and get with Iris and not get with Iris. Even the fandom likes Barry with Caitlin Snow over Iris because they felt like they had more chemistry. Even though I don't personally think that there was a romance there, but I can definitely understand that they had chemistry. Those two together felt um, really good. I just don't think that there was romantic tension there. I'll put it that way. But had they have gone that route where Barry or Caitlyn were interested, it wouldn't have felt weird because of how well they meshed together. Iris and Barry, even though I do think that they had like deep highs of what their relationship was, it always just felt like the only reason we're getting these two together is because the show says they're supposed to get together, and that's the only reason. But yeah, I think those are the five major reasons that I would say uh, are the issues with Iris's character. I'm not really gonna like edit this super crazy. I'm just gonna kind of play it out and then just kind of work with it. So y'all let me know in the comment section down below who another character that you think you'd like to see me do a breakdown of why they're hated is. Characters like Felicity, I definitely would love to do something like this for. Some people end up hating like Ollie, Oliver from Arrow. It doesn't have to be an Arrowverse character. I just felt like you would be on that train. So, and when this video gets 200 likes, I will pick a character from the comment section and do a breakdown on it from a film writer's perspective. But thank you guys so much for watching. It's been Trey. Feel free to check me out on my on the other channel that I help out with, Catered Chaos. We go live around 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Thursdays. Talk about trailers, movies, shows, bunch of random nonsense and entertainment that we watched over the last week and give you our thoughts, comments, questions, concerns about them. This has been a Trey Venture going into why you might hate Iris Island. Be brave, be bold, be you, and hopefully I will be in your future. Later.